You're back.
For authors, filmmakers, entertainment, and all your listening needs. Listen now to Talk Now Radio, where no topic is taboo.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Talk Now Radio, the listener-supported radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is Timothy Green Beckley. You may also know him as Mr. UFO, and he's also the editor over at Conspiracy Journal. And he's got a lot of irons in the fire, from what I can tell, because he's also the president of the Interlight Global Communications and editor of Conspiracy Journal, like I told you, and Bazaar. I like that title, Bazaar. It's all in the spelling. So, at any rate, if y'all want to ask questions during the show, you can call in at 832-632-7904. And if you want to learn more about Tim, you can go to conspiracyjournal.com, and it'll redirect you to the one that he's using more often, but it's easier to remember that one. But his regular domain is ufoReview.tripod.com/index.html. Tim, how you doing today?
Well, good, especially since I'm on the air with you. Glad to be here. I'm in New York City, just a couple blocks from the Empire State Building, while the Yankees and the Red Sox are playing not too far away.
Well, I got to be honest with you. I've been trying to get you on the air for a lot longer than what you realized.
Well, why didn't you you got to call me.
Actually, I did. I emailed you.
Well, you know,
4 years
a lot of times if people email for the first time and you that individual isn't in
no.
email, yeah.
I got a hold of you.
Oh, well, we're
But see,
here. We're here. That's all that matters, man. You know, we're here now, and we can talk about anything that you want to, and you know, of course, not only I'm into UFOs, of course, that's my specialty. I've had 3 sightings during my career, but I also have a pretty, heavy background in the paranormal, and I'm big on synchronicities. To me, nothing really is a coincidence. It all happens by choice. Now, who is doing the choosing is another, the subject.
Haven't figured that one out yet.
No, and anybody who claims that they have, is faulty to me. I mean, anybody, in fact, in any of these subjects, anybody that claims that they have the answer or answers probably have no answers.
They better go check their answers.
That's right. They got to check them out thoroughly, and that's what I've tried to do over the years. People always say, oh, you have a sensationalistic approach to this. Well, I guess because I've edited all these different magazines all over the years, and I was a stringer for the Inquirer and the Globe and the Tatler and all these other publications, and I used to write some of their headlines and all. So I got into that. I always think you got to have a strong punchline for an article. Of course, you can't let the reader down either. You got to kind of deliver at least part of the time. Otherwise, they're going to just say it's here's another guy crying a wolf or something. So and it is a sensational subject. People that take this thing and think it's all nuts and bolts. To me, that's kind of boring. I mean, if all you're interested in lights in the sky, that's not really going to get you, anywhere. It's what's happening down below treetop level that really matters. Yeah.
And that's where all the learning and investigation happens at.
Well, yeah, the one thing that I've done, I think that most of the other researchers have not bothered to do, is that, there've been a lot of pilots that have seen UFOs and police officers, and geez, I guess there isn't any profession or individuals from any walk of life that hasn't had some sort of encounters with this. Jimmy Carter had a UFO the sighting. Now, Jimmy, after all these years, people would always ask him about, what he saw, and the authorities, the astronomers and the skeptics and all say, all he saw was the planet Venus. So now, after all these years, if somebody asks him about UFOs, he'll say, "Oh, they told me it was Venus," because he doesn't want to, I guess get sneered at. Politicians have a habit of putting their feet in their mouths, and look at the last the debates, presidential
especially
debates.
the conservatives do that.
Yeah, for sure, Anyway, you talk about Jimmy Carter and his UFO sighting, and people think, and the skeptics push off the idea that it was the planet Venus. Well, at this very moment as we speak, there's a fellow down there in Georgia who's working on a documentary about not only Jimmy Carter's sighting, but it turns out around that same time, a couple of days before and after Carter's sighting, there was a wave of UFO reports in that town where he had the sighting. And some of these, one of them hovered right over the big water tower in town. One of the individuals, I saw a couple of clips from the movie, describes how this thing came down and landed in a field that not far away. So that doesn't sound like the planet Venus to me. And I'm looking forward actually to seeing the.
You're going to actually look up in the night sky and see Venus, and from our view and position, it's not moving. So anything anytime somebody sees something moving noticeably, it can't be any star or planet.
Yeah. Well, now I have seen things under unusual weather conditions, and sometimes a star or a planet could look like it's twinkling or something. But now I had 3 sightings. The first one was when I was 10 years old. It was a warm summer night, like in July or August of the year, and this would have been in like 1957. And that was a big year for UFO sightings. I mean, it was 1947, 1952, 1957, 1963, and so forth. In fact, I think we're due for about a wave now. But there was a buzz in the air about flying saucers and UFOs. A couple of books I guess had come out. Major Kehoe's book and Edward Ruppelt, who was with the Project Blue Book. And in those days, the reports were getting in the newspaper. Now there's seldom anything printed in the newspaper about the subject. Every once in a while, something will pop through, but it has to be pretty darn spectacular and a lot of witnesses for that.
About 4 or 5 years ago, you can put UFO in the Google News search engine, and you come up with page after page of a UFO sighting in different places.
Yeah. Well, that still goes on to some degree. Of course, MUFON collects reports. The Peter Davenport has the UFO group there up in Washington State, and they probably are the most active because they have, or used to, I believe, an 800 number. And if you called the police in a lot of locales, they would have a sticker, and they'd give you his phone number. And so he gets calls on a really active, basis, but not that much in the press. It's all on YouTube and some of the other I guess the websites and stuff, but in the old days the newspapers used to print these stories and they would give the names. So I would sit there on the telephone, and I was a teenager or slightly older, and I'd call these people and get the skinny on the mini, and find out what was going on. Anyway, getting back to my first sighting, it was about twilight, I don't know, 8 o'clock at night or something, like I say. It was summer, maybe a little bit later. And we were seated on the front porch in New Jersey, my home in New Jersey, of course, where I lived with my parents at the time. And in those days, nobody had air conditioner, that I can think of, And so we would all just sit outside until it cooled off, and then you go back indoors. Well, we were sitting on the stoop, as they say, and somebody came running up, across the street, pointing to the sky and said, look, there's something in the sky. So now, there were 2 objects. One was directly across the street over an abandoned leather factory that made purses or something. Lefkowitz Leather, I actually remember to this day. And no longer there, the building. And then there was one that was pretty close to hovering over the house, or above the street, actually, where I was. And these things circled in the sky. The one over the house would move over the factory building, and the one over the factory building would come on over to where we were. And after about 15 minutes or so, the one across the street, it just disappeared or vanished, like somebody had pulled a light switch, and it was gone. The other one remained in the sky there for a little bit while, and we kind of, I guess, lost interest. It wasn't doing anything, and it was getting cooler, so we went indoors. Now, the next day, there was a little item in the newspaper to the effect that other people had seen these UFOs in the sky. but the authorities were saying that it was nothing except a weather balloon. Well, even at the age of 10, I knew that this couldn't be a weather balloon. It was something that seemed to be under intelligent control. It wasn't bobbing and weaving in the air current, and it was lit up. Now, if people say, "Well, did you see any portholes or landing gear, or did any little green men wave at you?" And no, I can't say that I did, because it was kind of up above the cloud layer. Anyway, I became interested in the subject. I guess maybe I was before that even, because the house that I lived in had a little poltergeist activity going on, doors opening and closing and lights going on and all. So I kind of had an interest in this type of stuff, and I took out books from the library by Frank Edwards and Major Kehoe and a few of the other writers of the day, and I started writing letters to the local newspaper. And people started contacting me with their sightings. And then when I was about maybe 15 or maybe 16, well, I had started publishing a newsletter. It was the Interplanetary News Service Report, and it was mimeographed. I had a little printing press there in my porch. My mother made me move it out of the kitchen because it was getting ink all over the place. It was kind of really pretty sloppy way of doing it. You had to type the stencils, and there are no more mimeograph machines anymore. I don't even know if anybody remembers them, but you fed the ink in, and you could print with the stencils. And we built this up to a circulation of about 1,500 until finally I just couldn't do it anymore, because you had to collate the stuff and staple it, and it was taking away from my schoolwork, and it just. So Jim Mosley came along. He had a slightly bigger magazine called Saucer News, and he offered to, I guess the word would be, buy me out, although he didn't offer me any money. But he took over the expense of sending out his magazine, which is a little bit more professionally printed than mine. His was offset printed, not mimeographed, And he hired me to be managing editor of Saucer News, which was a paying position, and I started going to work in Manhattan. And I guess I've made, even though I was never really good at English in high school and never really went to journalism school or anything like that, publishing became my career. I actually packaged or published something over like 30 magazines.
Wow.
Or newspapers over the years. People, low-budget pulp publishers would actually hire me to put the magazines together. So I did magazines like Front Page Disasters. I did a football magazine, soap opera, lots of rock and roll. I was into rock and roll quite a bit at the time, and even produced a few shows and stuff. In fact, the bands like Kiss used to rehearse at the same studio some of my groups that I was producing rehearsed at, Talent Recon up on Times Square. So my background was in the publishing, and in fact, I edited a magazine called UFO Universe, which was sold on the newsstands all over the country. That lasted for about 11 or 12 years until the bottom just fell out of publishing altogether, magazine publishing. I mean, now, even here in Manhattan, you can't find a newsstand. I mean, if you want to buy, like a magazine or something like that, you can go to Barnes & Noble, and they have a selection. But magazines used to be sold on every corner. It was an outdoor stand, and the guy would sell you newspaper. You can't even get a newspaper hardly anymore. You got to really hunt around for it. Yeah, and I think it's terrible because I'm not a man of the internet age, although now I guess I am to a certain degree because you need it for business and all. But I have a hard time reading a magazine on the screen, even on my Kindle. I turn it sideways and it looks fine, but I'd rather have the magazine in my hand. So and then I started publishing books and stuff, and now we have over 200 titles and a wide range of subjects, mostly paranormal and UFO related, some religious stuff, a lot of magic, not prestidigitation, but occultism type of stuff, and we have a book on Jimi Hendrix and some celebrity stuff. We tried our hands at everything and managed to actually. I started publishing my own little stuff in about 1965, so I've seen more publishers and distributors and wholesalers and rackmen or jobbers or whatever they call them come and go, and since I've always maintained control of what I do, we're still here. And, I've gotten older. I can't say I've gotten too much wiser, but I'm still here, and I'm still doing it. And I guess I'll be doing it almost up until the day that I go on to the next phase of existence or something. And we've had our ups and downs, but like I said, we have almost 200 titles on Amazon. If listeners are interested, all they have to do is go over to Amazon and click on the books and type in my name, Timothy Beckley, and a lot of those titles, I don't know how 170 of them will show up at least, because I try to attach my name to it as editor or something anyway, because that's an easy way to find out what's going on. Anyway, my first sighting was in 1957. My second one was in the 1980s. I believe it would have been 1981 and 1982. I was invited by my friend, the late 8th Earl of Clancarty, who is a member of the House of Lords in England. Now, the Earl of Clancarty, whose real name is Brinsley Laporte Trench, was one of the original editors of the very prestigious at the time magazine called Flying Saucer Review, which came out of England, and it had was the only magazine that had an international circulation, and they were getting reports from all countries, and a lot of them dealt with contacts and humanoid creatures and things just beyond like lights in the sky. Anyway, Brinsley had invited me at my own expense to come over and talk to his UFO group, which is part of the House of Lords. It was an unofficial group, but he was one of the first actually to press for what we would today call disclosure. And he had about 75 members of the group, a few skeptics and a lot of believers, including Lord Hill Norton, who was the head of the British Department of Defense and a 5-star admiral. And he was interested in the subject, and so they pushed for disclosure to try to get the Ministry of Defense, which of course Nick Pope later worked at, to disclose this information. Anyway, after giving my little talk there at the House of Lords, I took the train and went over to this town near Stonehenge, Warminster. Now, Warminster at that point in the 1970s was like the hub of UFO activity. I mean, there were hundreds and hundreds of sightings going on over Star Hill and Cradle Hill, and it was phenomenal. And there was a fellow by the name of Arthur Shuttlewood, who book I later published in the United States here. He was the former skeptic, and he was the editor of the daily newspaper there, the Warminster Journal. And we went out one night. He knew I was visiting, and he invited me up to Cradle Hill, where most of these sightings had gone on. And at one point around 10 o'clock, he motioned to some object in the sky, or pointed out some object in the sky. And now, I would say it was the size of about a basketball. It was fairly well lit, but you couldn't see any definition. In other words, you couldn't make out a metallic hull of the craft or anything like that. I mean, I won't exaggerate and add to the story. I just tell you what happened. And in fact, at first I thought, well, maybe it couldn't have been a street light, because there were no streets there, and it was way up in the sky. Now, we were near a military base, and some of the skeptics had said, oh, this was like military stuff that was going on. But I saw one fellow, he was retired RAF pilot, Bob Strong, and he had like 7 or 8 photo albums, filled with all kinds of photographs. He would mount a camera on a tripod on the roof of his car and stay out all night, and got just some really, really remarkable things. UFOs that looked like bats, one UFO that looked like a train passing across the sky. It was some phenomenal stuff. Now, he passed away several decade or more ago, and I don't know what happened to his photographs. Some of them were published in authors' books, over there, but that's a thing of the past, and unfortunately I think a lot of them were destroyed, because usually when something happens to a researcher and he passes away, the family has no interest in it, and it goes into the trash compactor. Anyway, we're looking up at the sky, and here's this object, and the author says, wait a minute, I'm going to go over to the trunk of my car. he goes over to the trunk and he takes out this giant flashlight, or torch, I would call it. I mean, it's a pretty big battery-operated thing, you know, and starts blinking at the object in the sky. And not Morse code or anything, but blinking on and off, on and off. And every time he would blink at this object with this torchlight, it seemed to respond by moving around in the sky, as if it were like a marionette, you know, a puppet or something like that, and somebody was controlling the strings. Then after maybe 10 or 15 minutes or so, the cloud covering came and it started to rain, and we went back to the inn for a brew. And that's the story of my second sighting. But it did seem, if you ask me, it did seem that it was under intelligent control. Now, was it from Mars or Venus or from the inner Earth? I have no idea. But it was something that was there, and it did seem to be responding to us.
If you could figure out the language, you mean?
Well, like I say, it wasn't Morse code or anything like that, but you know, I know people, even so-called believers, and they kind of poke fun at Stephen Greer. I don't know if you ever had him on the show or not, but he goes out into the desert and they set lights down there, and you know, a ring of lights, and start flashing at the sky, and he'll claim that something, you know, will come over and signal back. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't been there to witness that, but I can't be too skeptical of it, because I do know for a fact that people have communicated through what we would call light beams, or some sort of code that they set up. There was a fellow by the name of John Otto, who back in the 1950s had a number of successes in communicating or trying to contact these craft. He would actually get messages over his radio, the ham radio, you know, and whatever was on the other side of the microphone there, or the airwaves, would tell them where to go, and say that they would have a sighting if they tried to communicate and they were friendly and their telepathic thoughts were positive, and so forth. Now, I don't know if I believe that or it's all a bunch of hooey, but there were witnesses to the effect that they did have sightings when they went out and tried this form of communication. So I do think that these things, these objects, call them UFOs, whatever you want to identify them as, are under intelligent control. I don't think that a lot of them are from other planets. I think the majority of what we are witnessing is some sort of paranormal, or what we would term supernatural phenomena. What happens at a UFO landing site is often pretty similar to what happens at a seance or in a haunted house. And many of these witnesses who started out just as you know, witnesses of lights in the sky, later on, if you go back and contact them, they'll tell you some pretty remarkable stories and experiences that they've had since their original sighting, including poltergeist-type phenomena in the house and so forth.
Like there's a connection.
There is a connection, or we're dealing. Well, I do believe that from time to time, there's like gateways or window areas where the veil between this world and the next becomes thinner, and these objects and occupants are able to come through. Now, whether they know that they're coming here, or whether it's kind of like people who vanish here, maybe they end up there. That's something to think about, right? And I think that even like these Bigfoot creatures and Mothman and was it the demon down there in I forget, North or South Carolina, you know, that came out a couple of times and scratched people's car and all. I think that they come from the same place as these UFOs do, that they're from another dimension or another reality or realm or something along that line.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of people are the opinion that they're from another dimension rather than another planet. I think maybe myself that some of them may be from other planets and some of them might be from other dimensions. I don't see why it has to be one way or the other, in other words.
No, and of course now the evidence is rather lacking or rather thin for any conclusion. That's why UFOs are unidentified, and that's the way they remain, you know, because you can't, if you see a light, and even if you have an encounter with an occupant, how in God's name do you know if what the occupant is telling you is the literal truth, or they're just kind of like, tricksters that are making it up or teasing people or whatever it is. In fact, in the early 1950s, you had all these contact claims, by George Adamski and Orfeo Angelucci and Dan Fry and George Van Tassel. And the stories were colorful, and I do think that they really had a lot to do with sparking our imagination as far as like space travel and going to other planets and landing on the moon goes. So I kind of don't fault these people for expressing themselves. I do believe that some of these gentlemen may have had legitimate experiences, original ones, but later on, in order to just keep attention, they just started, adding more, stories and things and so forth, and it just kind of sometimes it would get out of hand. But often in these cases, they would say that they had a meeting with some long-haired Venusian or monker from the planet Mars. And we know today that they're really probably, despite what maybe John Lear has to say, I don't think there are people walking around on the moon or on Mars, and certainly, unless they're sunbathing, they probably aren't on Venus either.
For a deep tan, no less.
So,
crispy critters.
Yeah. Of course, there is the theory that some of these craft or vehicles or vessels or lights could be natural phenomena. There are certain places around the globe, like Brown Mountain, North Carolina, and Marfa, Texas, where these sightings are almost persistent, and they seem to be more of a kind of a light phenomena or some sort of plasma than they are physical craft. However, on the other hand, people say, they're earthquake lights and they're caused by the movements of the tectonic. But no, that's not the case either, and they're certainly not marsh gas, because these objects, or these spook lights, whatever you want to call them, seem to be under intelligent control. Because I've been to Brown Mountain, North Carolina, and I'm good friends with Joshua Warren, who's on, of course, Coast to Coast. He has his own show, Speaking the Strange, on Saturday night. And he's investigated the Brown Mountain lights for several decades, maybe even a little longer. And I talked to numerous people when I was there back in the 60s and 70s who told me accounts where they would approach these objects. And at one point, they were showing up on almost a nightly basis. And they would get really close to these objects. They would appear in the woods, and they would move closer. They, at one point, they even had built an observation tower there. But as they got closer to the object, it was as if the object was picking up on their thoughts and teasing them and playing tricks on them, because the objects would disappear in front of them but appear almost immediately behind them. And then if they headed off in the direction of the light again, it would vanish and do the same thing over and over again. So they do seem to be under, intelligent control, even some of these spook lights that have been seen. And whether they're related to, hardcore UFOs, I don't know, but I suspect probably some of them are.
So I have to wonder, when they wink out like that, are they slipping into another dimension out of phase with ours, or are they activating some form of cloaking technology just to mess with us?
Well, that's a good point, but it seems like they have the ability to instantaneously transport themselves. Now, here we were talking before about Tim Schwartz, who you said had been on the program, and Tim has investigated quite a number of haunted houses, and he's also investigated UFO cases. He's written quite a few books on time travel and Nikola Tesla and so forth. But he tells of several episodes where there was a poltergeist phenomena going on in a house in Indiana. And one of the poltergeist phenomena, instead of just doors opening and closing and bureau drawers doing the same, stones were falling from the ceiling. They would appear just out of nowhere, and then they would drop to the floor, clang, clang, clang. And people thought, well, maybe somebody in the house, one of the kids or something, was throwing them from another room. But that's not the case. And there have been other, in fact, that's a pretty common thing in poltergeist cases. In fact, I remember in investigating a case many, many years ago where objects were falling on somebody's roof, and they weren't being thrown from anywhere. They were just appearing out of nowhere, and they almost like hail, these stones, and then they would fall over into the yard or something like this. And the sheriff, they even parked. I remember talking to one of the police officers. They had even parked their automobiles, their cruisers nearby, helping to catch the prankster throwing one of the stones. But they never managed to do that. Now, of course, the best story of teleportation like that was told to me by my friend Uri Geller, the internationally known spoon bender. He says he was in a house one time, and money actually rained down on the place where it was. They could actually.
I need to hang out around him.
Yeah, I think so too. He's done very well for himself. I guess if you get the right contacts and they do that, yeah, you're in good shape. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. Although I did have an experience a couple of weeks ago, and I'm very big on synchronicities and so-called coincidences. I think that some of these synchronicities, and it turns out that people in the paranormal seem to have them more frequently than people who are not involved in this field. All right, well, let me set this up for you. It was one of the first nice days of summer, and my associate Carol, who's worked with me for many years, and she does the covers of some of our books, and she's been fascinated with the paranormal. In fact, I first met her. She came to the New York School of Occult Arts and Sciences that I was running back in the 70s. I had one of the first metaphysical centers in the country. Of course, now there are many, or at least they went through a phase. So we decided we're going to take the bus across town to Hudson River Park. I had never been there before, but I understand it was like very nice, and it's on the river and so forth. And it was a very nice day. So I figured, well, let's do a little something different. So Carol suggests, she says, let's go over to 23rd Street and bring some change with you. Now, normally the bus in Manhattan costs you $2.50, and you can't put a dollar bill in. If you don't have a Metro card, you got to throw dimes and quarters and nickels, no pennies, please. And certainly no foreign money. So we get over to the bus stop on 5th Avenue. We're going over to 10th or 11th Avenue. And Carol says to me, she says, if you show your ID, your senior citizen ID, you get on the bus for half price, which would be $1.25. Well, one of the reasons I never take the bus is $2.50, and who the heck is usually got that amount of change, or you got to scurry around in your pocket, and it's all pennies and stuff. So for the day, I had taken my change and I put in a little just compartment or something, like a little wallet, so that I could fish it out and throw it into the place where you throw the change on the bus, And then the driver kind of nods at you, and something, goes, they'll give you a little buzz or something, and you go on, showing that you paid. In other words, it counts it automatically, the coins. So I take the coins out of my little change purse, and I tell Carol, hold on to the quarters while I look in my wallet and see where my ID is, right, to show the driver. And while I'm fishing for my ID, she says to me, oh, well, you better find another quarter, because one of these is a Canadian quarter, and you can't use that on the bus. The driver will toss you off. And besides, it won't go through the change, device that accepts change on the bus. Okay, there's no problem. So I find another quarter. And I said to myself, well, what do I do with the Canadian quarter? If I put it back in with my change, I'm only going to have to go through this again, and that's somewhat of a nuisance. But I hate to throw change out. I mean, money is money. So I took the Canadian quarter, and I put it on the little bench where the people that are waiting for the bus would be seated, right? I figured, well, maybe somebody from Toronto will show up and see the quarter there, and they could take it home and use it as the change in Canada. Okay, so we get on the bus. I throw my 5 American quarters into the turnstile there, and we sit down. Now, the bus ride across town only takes maybe 5 or 6 minutes. You're not going very far, but it beats, walking if it's 85 degrees out. So, okay, we sit down, and normally they recommend you get off the back of the bus, but sometimes it's hard to push the door open, and there wasn't a lot of people waiting in line to get on the bus to the front door anyway, since we were at the final destination. So Carol goes ahead of me, and I'm walking down the 2 or 3 stairs that lead to the street. And there on the sidewalk, exactly where the bench would have been if they had a bench, just like where I left the quarter, was a shiny quarter on the ground. I picked it up, and it was an American quarter. So now I left a Canadian quarter at the bus stop where we got on, and I found an American quarter when we got off the bus. Now, what is the chance of that happening? Next to none. Now, I figure with the rate of exchange, I made about $0.015. so I was ahead of the game, but I think somebody is doing this. Now, I've had other incidences with change. Change seems to be one of the ways that whoever is responsible for these coincidences, and like I say, I think there is some intelligence behind it. If the listeners want to get a grip on this, I suggest that they Google Dr. John C. Lilly. Now, Dr. John C. Lilly was a scientist who claimed that he talked or communicated with dolphins. And he had a lot of synchronicities, pretty far out ones. And he believed that there was actually a synchronicity kind of review board or something in some other dimension. And by setting up coincidences and synchronicities, this was their way of communicating with us, since they could not appear in physical form, and also proving their existence. Now, it seems like a far-fetched theory, but I have gone into places like many, many years ago, I was invited to speak for a group in San Francisco. I had never been to San Francisco before. It was a fairly successful lecture. I think we had 300 or 400 people there. It was in a high school auditorium, and there were even people in the balcony, and I showed my UFO slides. And, of course, I was fairly young at that age, so I had less of an inkling about what was going on. So now that was on a Friday or a Saturday night, and I was scheduled to leave San Francisco back to the east on Sunday late in the afternoon. So we decided, since we had time to kill, the promoter suggested, they were going to take me out to brunch. So they picked a place at random in downtown San Francisco. Nobody, certainly not me, and none of them had ever been in this particular restaurant before. And we were going to have a couple of Bloody Marys and Eggs Benedict or whatever you eat on Sunday at brunch. And I happened to mention to the group, I think there were 5 or 6 people there. I said, geez, I should have thought ahead. One of my friends who used to teach at the New York School of Occult Arts and Sciences, a fellow by the name of Alan Vaughan, who was a psychic himself, but he was also a very serious parapsychologist, had moved to San Francisco to be editor of Psychic Magazine, which was a nicely laid out and very graphic paranormal publication in those days when magazines were being published on all sorts of subjects. And it had kind of a very serious quasi-scientific approach to the subject. And I said, well, geez, I should have really called Alan and tried to get in touch with him and invite him to come to my talk, because he was a good friend of mine, and we always had a beer together and a few jokes and so forth. And, after he would lecture or teach a workshop at the New York School of Occult Arts and Sciences. So about 10 minutes later, the swinging doors to this bar swing open, and who walks in? Somebody that looked like Alan Vaughan. And I ushered the guy, I waved the guy over, and I said, "Aren't you Alan Vaughan?" And he said, "Yes." I said, well, I explained the situation, and I said, well, do you come here often? I mean, how do you meet somebody in San Francisco, which probably got 1.5 million population or something like that, maybe more, that you never been to this restaurant, you never been to the town before, and here comes the very person that you're talking about through the door? And so he sat down. We had a good chuckle about it, and I said, "Well, Alan, I know you edited Psychic magazine. What are you working on now?" He said, "Well, this is another synchronicity. I'm doing a book on coincidences and synchronicities, and I guess I'll have to use this in the book." So if you can find this dusty old paperback book, it was done in the late 60s, early 70s by Alan Vaughan. I think we're case 17 in there, where he talks about running into me in this place that none of us had ever been in before. And I have that remarkable ability to run into people that I know, but they don't know that I'm going to be at a certain location. In fact, there was a fellow who used to work for Omni magazine by the name of Harry Levelson. And Harry had moved from New York to Miami Beach, but he never had a telephone. He hated telephones, and you could really only reach him. There was no email in those days. You had to write him a letter, and maybe he'd answer you a month or so later. Well, every time I was in Miami, I'd run into this fellow. He would be Harry Levelson. He'd be going to the post office to pick up his mail, and I'd be eating in some coffee shop there, and he would appear, and we'd have a brief conversation, and then 2 or 3 years later, the same thing would go on. So I don't know. Are these things just coincidences? It seems like they're beyond coincidences. I mean, you don't leave a quarter at a bus stop, and then 7 or 8 blocks later you find another quarter. I mean, it kind of boggles the mind. And I found out that, like I say, I kind of did an unofficial survey that the people in this field seem to have more synchronicities than people who don't. But then maybe most people just don't see. They don't, maybe they don't keep track of it, or they don't notice it, or it doesn't.
I was going to say that.
A particular meaning to them.
I was thinking that maybe what happens is people in this particular field are more used to paying better attention or more attention to it, and so they pick up on it.
Uh-huh. So that's the synchronicities. I mean, it's just I'm going to eventually maybe do a book on it, but people ask me, well, what does it mean? Well, it hasn't told me to go over to a certain slot machine in Atlantic City or anything like that. The only thing I've come out ahead so far is like I say, about a penny and a half on the Canadian quarter with the rate of exchange. So I don't know, what that all means. But now another time, I was organizing. I had put together a UFO expo, UFO Paranormal Expo in Palm Springs, not far from Giant Rock, where the UFO contactee movement had actually begun, in the early New Age movement, whatever you want to call it, in the early 1950s. And our guest of honor was Robert Weiss, who directed the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still, with Klaatu and the robot and all of that. One of the better science fiction movies directly related to UFOs. I'm sure everybody's seen it several times.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite films. The actual occupant of the craft is a human being, human type looking person from another planet who comes down here to warn us about our use of nuclear, activity and bombs and stuff like that. It's a very New Agey type of theme. So I invited Robert Weiss, who was the director, to give our keynote talk on the subject. And Palm Springs it's a I don't know if you've been there or not. It's a lovely place to go. All the millionaires like Arthur Guthrie and Roy Rogers, they all had big estates there. I mean, because they had bought into Palm Springs, just when Hollywood was exploding. What would that been in the late 30s, early 40s or something? So they had some. It was a lot of wealth there and a lot of golf courses and restaurants and stuff like that. And I worked a spectacular deal with one of the resorts there where they didn't charge me anything to put on the expo, for the room, the banquet rooms or anything like that, because it was in the middle of the summer and they couldn't rent it out. So we had this fairly big deal, and 3 nights, 3 days of UFO lectures and workshops and things along that line. And I was very happy that I successfully put this together. Okay, so we're setting up on Friday late afternoon. The vendors are coming in and putting their books and VHS tapes, I guess, in those days, because there weren't any DVDs. And they're setting up their tables, this UFO photographs and stuff. And we're downstairs. We got all the banquet facilities that we need, lecture halls and so forth. And there are some stragglers that are just coming in from the street, the public. Even though we weren't supposed to be open to that evening, I wasn't going to chase anybody away because we were too busy, trying to get our books out of boxes and get them on the table anyway. So this one gentleman comes by, and he stops at the table, picks up a couple of books, and leaves them, behind, and continues to, walk around the other tables. So I noticed that he had left a stack of mail there, like he had just been from the, picked up the mail from the post office, because it had, a rubber band around it, and maybe it was 10 letters or something like that. People still used the mail in those days, and the post office was able to deliver a mail without putting it into the wrong mailbox and so forth.
The good old days.
The good old days, yeah. Okay, so anyway, this guy is continuing looking at the other books and the other tables and leaves his mail there, and so I pick it up. And I happen to glance at it before following him down the hall, and I see that the mail is addressed to Kenneth Anger. Now, I don't know if you know who Kenneth Anger is, but he's this underground movie maker. He did a film years ago that kind of had a cult following called Scorpio Rising, and the music was done by Robert Plant, the Led Zeppelin. And he was into Crowley and occultism and stuff. And he was quite a figure on the underground movie scene. And of course, I make some films, and I've always been intrigued with some of the people. Anyway, he had a following, but you had to know, the underground and the alternative movies to know who he was. I mean, he wasn't a figure that was known, I think, widely to the public. More of an artistic type, kind of like the Andy Warhol of the West Coast.
He probably wanted to keep a low profile.
Well, I don't know if he wanted to. No, he would have liked, I think, to have. He's still alive, actually. I think he would have liked to have more people see his films, but it was kind of very low budget and very artsy, and I enjoyed him. I mean, to this day, if you could find the Scorpio Rising, it's well worth it. It's something like you won't see again, probably. Anyway, so I pick up this mail, and I figure, well, geez, is this really Kenneth Anger? Because he's one of my, I wouldn't say heroes, but he's somebody that I'm interested in and intrigued by. What would he be doing at my conference, So I pick up the mail, and I follow him down the hall, and I say, excuse me, you left this here, on my table. And by the way, I couldn't help but seeing your name on the envelopes. Are you the Kenneth Anger, the movie maker? And he said, yes, I am. And we had a brief conversation. I said, are you here for the conference? And he said, yes, but I really can't, afford to go for the whole event. And I said, well, you have to be my guest. So I seated him at the same table as Robert Weiss, and I got to introduce both of them that evening at the banquet as part of the conference. Again, what is the chances of running into somebody like that who you've always admired at at your UFO conference? And I would have never known who it was if he hadn't left the mail behind. See, that's the kicker there. Somebody made him something or whatever, made him leave that stack of mail, and so I got to introduce him, and he's still making films and working as an artist and so forth. You can Google Kenneth Anger, and he's had quite a career, actually. And anyway, that was one of the highlights of my, I guess, a career as a UFO and expo entrepreneur.
Uh-huh. And how long was you doing this here before you got into Conspiracy Journal?
Well, let's see. Conspiracy Journal is now, we just printed issue number 42. But if you look closely at the masthead of Conspiracy Journal, Bazaar, it says incorporating inner light and UFO review. Now, I've put out, like I say, 30 or more magazines and newspapers over the years. The UFO review was the world's only UFO newspaper. And it was distributed all over the country. I think a little bit in Europe, although it's kind of hard to bundle up the newspapers and send them there. And it was the only newspaper on the topic, and it did fairly well. I mean, UFO magazines, you're never going to get rich by doing them, and today you're not even going to sell them because there's no place to sell them. In fact, Open Minds magazine just folded with their last issue. They've been very successful holding those UFO conventions in Arizona for the last I don't know how many years, and they put out a very colorful magazine and had a lot of good material in it. My good friend Antonio Huneas was one of the editors for a while, and a very lively magazine, but it just recently folded because there are no places to put magazines out anymore. So I don't know. Like I say, the Conspiracy Journal is just kind of a continuing process. It got to the point where UFOs weren't quite that popular anymore as far as sales go. So it's part of the conspiracy. Now, we don't get into like Alex Jones and all. I mean, he's a conspiracy nut, and I use that word not even very loosely. But he's into conspiracies, but it's not my kind of conspiracy for the most part. Now, we've published a couple of books on the federal exposing the Federal Reserve, and we have one on the evil banksters of Wall Street. We've got suppressed intelligence reports, which does a lot of this kind of
Vatican heresies.
Yeah. But of course, my thing is the paranormal, and most people get into conspiracy theories by getting into UFOs, and I guess that's kind of how I did too, because you realize that somebody's pulling the wool over our eyes, because the government insists, well, there's nothing to this. Well, they're either dumb and dumber, which we certainly know over the years that they are, and I think a lot of people realize after they have a UFO sighting and they're told that they saw a weather balloon of the planet Venus, that somebody's trying to make a fool out of them.
Yeah, trying to tell them there's a massive rainstorm and somebody lost their weather control.
So if you can't believe in the government says you can't believe in UFOs. Well, what the hell can you believe them about anything?
Actually, I've asked that question a lot recently. I mean, because it doesn't really matter if you're talking about the government, UFOs, ghosts, or the Vatican or anything else. I found very little you could really tack on to you could believe in. Yeah,
for sure, right? You can't count what you can believe what they say on one hand,
It's like we're living in a great big massive deception.
Indeed. Well, maybe this all is an illusion. The whole damn ball of wax. There's some people who think that we're living inside of a computer, and that we're part of some
virtual reality.
Yeah. Well, I don't rule that out. I don't know. It seems pretty far fetched. And how would you prove it? You got to bust outside of the bubble, I guess, somehow. And then maybe if you bust out, you don't come back.
Kind of reminds you of the Matrix.
Well, yeah, I guess that some people say, well, the Matrix is more than a science fiction story. It's based on some sort of illogical reality, and maybe it is.
Hard to say. I do know that one of the things I was wondering about you was what you thought about the Roswell incident, about whether or not that was the actual event that was being covered up or not.
Oh. Well, now this is my theory on Roswell, and I did give credit to Kevin Randall and Donald Schmidt and all for being persistent and chasing down the facts, and I use that in quotes because facts are kind of hard to come by when it comes to the Roswell incident, and of course there are many theories about Roswell. I don't subscribe to the theory that the craft that crashed outside of Roswell was extraterrestrial. Now, I did talk to Jesse Marcel Jr., And I do believe that his father brought into the house this a miracle metal that you could bend and twist and it would go back to its original shape. And you couldn't, burn it or apparently destroy it in any fashion. But it doesn't sound like that. Well, first of all, if this is a craft from somewhere else, why do they crash apparently all the time, or at least on a frequent basis? How do they manage to get from there to here and back again if they can just get struck by a bolt of lightning and come down in the desert somewhere? I also have come to the conclusion that the government says, in effect, that if you're going to believe in UFOs or flying saucers, as they used to be called, of course, you should believe that they come from another planet, that you shouldn't believe that they come somewhere closer to home. But you shouldn't believe in them at all. But if you do, think that they come from somewhere, else. My feeling is that the crash at Roswell was of a device that was constructed by the former Nazi scientists and engineers that had been brought over here to the United States under Project Paperclip. Somewhere in the 1920s or 1930s, a group of German mediums and psychics had gathered at a hunting lodge and had channeled information from somewhere else. And this channel information, whoever was speaking with them or telepathically, I think it was through automatic writing. They were giving him designs and graphics of the craft and giving him information on the propulsion system and so forth. I believe that this propulsion system was developed over a period of time, and when these former Nazi engineers and scientists came here in the after the war, that they continued with this technology, and the technology was probably developed to the point where some of these things that we see in the sky today, even the boomerang and triangle-shaped craft, originated, that it's some kind of technology that's different than the rocket propulsion that we have, and it was developed by these German scientists. And the government certainly would not want us to know that they were in cahoots with a bunch of ex-Nazis. So I think that even some of these military guys will tell you, they saw alien bodies and they saw this craft and it was probably extraterrestrial, because they're kind of going along with what the official word is that don't talk about UFOs, or if you do, certainly don't mention this Nazi technology connection. So I think that some of these craft, and the ones that, certainly the one at, there might have been several, the one at Roswell was not from somewhere else. It was made right here on Earth, but this German technology was probably based on something that was channeled at some point back in the 1920s or 30s. So it still gives it a different slant. It's not like saying that it just came from nowhere here. But the technology, the craft that the crash there at Roswell was not something that was, 50,000 years ahead of anything that we have now. I mean, we supposedly were able to back engineer the technology, the transistor, and all this stuff. So it's nothing that far-fetched. Also, if you go back to the early stories, the flying saucers and landings and so forth, some of the occupants spoke German, or at least had a German accent. A Nebraska grain buyer by the name of Reinhold Schmidt claimed that he came across a craft of some sort in a door open. He went inside, and here were these Aryan-looking crew members or occupants of this craft, and they spoke with a German accent. And even George Adamski, what does he describe meeting? A very Aryan-type orthon with long blonde hair and blue eyes and so forth. So I think it all points back to this German or beginning of the saucer story, and the government has successfully covered up at least this part of the phenomena by making us think that it's all, if you're going to believe they're from Mars or Venus. Don't believe that they're from Berlin.
Right.
No Berlin sauces here. No.
All righty. Well, listen, it's come up on the bewitching hour on us.
I see that, and I've hogged the microphone, and
No, that's fine. That's fine. You're interesting to listen to.
Well, thank you. I've been doing this just so long. And I still enjoy talking about it, especially the people who are intrigued by this. And I do again, if you want to get a free subscription to our Conspiracy Journal, Tim Schwartz does it online. He does the online weekly version, and we put out a printed version a couple of times a year, which lists all of our books. Or you can just go to, and that you can reach us at conspiracyjournal.com. And if you want a list of all the books, just go over to Amazon, click on the books, and type in my name, Timothy Beckley, and you'll see everything. And I'll be happy to sell you the books so you can buy them there. And keep looking up at the sky and keep your feet on the ground and forge ahead, my man. Forge ahead.
All right. That sounds like a winner. You do the same. It's been a pleasure. I hope to have you back.
Well, you betcha. And certainly some of our authors will contradict what I have to say.
Hey, I'm going to get in touch with you.
They got their all individual ideas. All right.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care, man. Bye-bye.